Welcome, chickens. This is Chickabiddy Audiobooks, and today I'll be reading The Story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, as it appears in the Arabian Nights, their best-known tales, edited by Nora Archibald Smith and Kate Douglas Smith Wiggin. This book is in the public domain. You can find a link to the full text in the description below if you'd like to follow along. The Story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. In a town in Persia, there lived two brothers, one named Qasim, the other Ali Baba. Their father left them scarcely anything, but as he had divided his little property equally between them, it would seem that their fortune ought to have been equal, but chance determined otherwise. Qasim married a wife who soon after became heiress to a large sum and to a warehouse full of rich goods, so that he all at once became one of the richest and most considerable merchants, and lived at his ease. Ali Baba, on the other hand, who had married a woman as poor as himself, lived in a very wretched habitation, and had no other means to maintain his wife and children but his daily labor of cutting wood and bringing it to town to sell, upon 3 asses, which were his whole substance. One day, when Ali Baba was in the forest and had just cut wood enough to load his asses, he saw at a distance a great cloud of dust, which seemed to be driven toward him. He observed it very attentively, and distinguished soon after a body of a horse. Though there had been no rumor of robbers in that country, Ali Baba began to think that they might prove such, and without considering what might become of his asses, was resolved to save himself. He climbed up a large, thick tree, whose branches, at a little distance from the ground, were so close to one another that there was but little space between them. He placed himself in the middle, from whence he could see all that passed without being discovered, and the tree stood at the base of a single rock, so steep and craggy that nobody could climb up it. The troop, who were all well mounted and armed, came to the foot of this rock, and there dismounted. Ali Baba counted 40 of them, and, from their looks and equipage, was assured that they were robbers. Nor was he mistaken in his opinion, for they were a troop of banditti, who, without doing any harm to the neighborhood, robbed at a distance, and made that place the rendezvous. But what confirmed him in his opinion was, that every man unbridled his horse, tied him to some shrub, and hung about his neck a bag of corn which they brought behind them. Then each of them took his saddle wallet, which seemed to Ali Baba to be full of gold and silver from its weight. One, who was most personable among them, and whom he took to be their captain, came with his wallet on his back under the tree which Ali Baba was concealed, and making his way through some shrubs, pronounced these words so distinctly, "Open, sesame," that Ali Baba heard him. As soon as the captain of the robbers had uttered these words, a door opened in the rock, and after he had made all his troop enter before him, he followed them, when the door shut again of itself. The robbers stayed some time within the rock, and Ali Baba, who feared that someone, or all of them together, might come out and catch him if he should endeavor to make his escape, was obliged to sit patiently in the tree. He was nevertheless tempted to get down, mount one of their horses, and lead another, driving his asses before him with all the haste he could to town. But the uncertainty of the event made him choose the safest course. At last the door opened again, and the 40 robbers came out. As the captain went in last, he came out first, and stood to see them all pass by him, when Ali Baba heard him make the door close by pronouncing these words, "Shut, sesame." Every man went and bridled his horse, fastened his wallet, and mounted again. And when the captain saw them all ready, he put himself at their head, and they returned the way they had come. Ali Baba did not immediately quit his tree, for, said he to himself, they may have forgotten something, and may come back again, and then I shall be taken. He followed them with his eyes as far as he could see them, and afterwards stayed a considerable time before he descended. Remembering the words the captain of the robbers used to cause the door to open and shut, he had the curiosity to try if his pronouncing them would have the same effect. Accordingly, he went among the shrubs, and perceiving the door concealed behind them, stood before it, and said, "Open, sesame." The door instantly flew wide open. Ali Baba, who expected a dark, dismal cavern, was surprised to see it well lighted and spacious, in the form of a vault, which received the light from an opening at the top of the rock. He saw all sorts of provisions, rich bales of silk stuff, brocade, and valuable carpeting, piled upon one another, gold and silver ingots in great heaps, and money in bags. The sight of all these riches made him suppose that this cave must have been occupied for ages by robbers, who had succeeded one another. Ali Baba did not stand long to consider what he should do, but went immediately into the cave, and as soon as he had entered, the door shut of itself. But this did not disturb him because he knew the secret to open it again. He never regarded the silver, but made the best use of his time in carrying out as much of the gold coin as he thought his 3 asses could carry. He collected his asses, which were dispersed, and when he had loaded them with the bags, laid wood over in such a manner that they could not be seen. When he had done, he stood before the door, and pronouncing the words, "Shut, Sesame!" the door closed after him, for it had shut of itself while he was within, but remained open while he was out. He then made the best of his way to town. When Ali Baba got home, he drove his asses into a little yard, shut the gates very carefully, threw off the wood that covered the bags, carried them into his house, and ranged them in order before his wife, who sat on a sofa. His wife handled the bags, and finding them full of money, suspected that her husband had been robbing, insomuch that she could not help saying, "Ali Baba, have you been so unhappy as to—" "Be quiet, wife," interrupted Ali Baba. "Do not frighten yourself. I am no robber, unless he may be one who steals from robbers. You will no longer entertain an ill opinion of me when I shall tell you of my good fortune." He then emptied the bags, which raised such a great heap of gold as dazzled his wife's eyes. And when he had done, told her the whole adventure from beginning to end, and, above all, recommended her to keep it secret. The wife, cured of her fears, rejoiced with her husband at their good fortune, and would count all the gold piece by piece. "Wife," replied Ali Baba, "you do not know what you undertake when you pretend to count the money. You will never have done. I will dig a hole and bury it. There is no time to be lost." "You are in the right, husband," replied she, "but let us know, as nigh as possible, how much we have. I will borrow a small measure in the neighborhood and measure it, while you dig the hole." "What you are going to do is to no purpose, wife," said Ali Baba. "If you would take my advice, you had better let it alone. But keep the secret and do what you please." Away the wife ran to her brother-in-law Cassim, who lived just near by, but was not then at home, and, addressing herself to his wife, desired her to lend her a measure for a little while. Her sister-in-law asked her whether she would have a great or a small one. The wife asked for a small one. The sister-in-law agreed to lend one, but as she knew Ali Baba's poverty, she was curious to know what sort of grain his wife wanted to measure, and artfully putting some suet at the bottom of the measure, brought it to her with an excuse, that she was sorry that she had made her stay so long, but that she could not find it sooner. Ali Baba's wife went home, set the measure upon the heap of gold, filled it and emptied it often upon the sofa, till she had done, when she was very well satisfied to find the number of measures amounted to so many as they did, and went to tell her husband, who had almost finished digging the hole. While Ali Baba was burying the gold, his wife, to show her exactness and diligence to her sister-in-law, carried the measure back again, but without taking notice that a piece of gold had stuck to the bottom. "Sister," said she, giving it to her again, "you see that I have not kept your measure long. I am obliged to you for it, and return it with thanks." As soon as her sister-in-law was gone, Cassim's wife looked at the bottom of the measure, and was inexpressibly surprised to find a piece of gold stuck to it. Envy immediately possessed her breast. "What?" said she, "has Ali Baba gold so plentiful as to measure it? Where has that poor wretch got all his wealth?" Cassim, her husband, was not at home, but at his counting-house, which he left always in the evening. His wife waited for him, and thought the time an age, so great was her impatience to tell him the circumstance, at which she guessed he would be as much surprised as herself. When Cassim came home, his wife said to him, "Cassim, I know you think yourself rich, but you are much mistaken. Ali Baba is infinitely richer than you. He does not count his money, but measures it." Cassim desired her to explain the riddle, which she did, by telling him the stratagem which she had used to make the discovery, and showed him the piece of money, which was so old that they could not tell in what prince's reign it was coined. Cassim, instead of being pleased, conceived a base envy at his brother's prosperity. He could not sleep all that night, and went to him in the morning before sunrise, although after he had married the rich widow, he had never treated him as a brother, but neglected him. "Ali Baba," said he, accosting him, "you are very reserved in your affairs. You pretend to be miserably poor, and yet you measure gold." "How, brother?" replied Ali Baba. "I do not know what you mean. Explain yourself." "Do not pretend ignorance," replied Cassim, showing him the piece of gold his wife had given him. "How many of these pieces," added he, "have you? My wife found this at the bottom of the measure you borrowed yesterday." By this discourse, Ali Baba perceived that Cassim and his wife, through his own wife's folly, knew what they had so much reason to conceal, but what was done could not be recalled. Therefore, without showing the least surprise or trouble, he confessed all, told his brother by what chance he had discovered this retreat of the thieves, in what place it was, and offered him part of his treasure to keep the secret. "I expect as much," replied Cassim haughtily, "but I must know exactly where this treasure is, and how I may visit it myself when I choose. Otherwise I will go and inform against you, and then you will not only get no more, but will lose all you have, and I shall have a share for my information." Ali Baba, more out of his natural good temper than frightened by the menaces of his unnatural brother, told him all he desired, and even the very words he was to use to gain admission into the cave. Cassim, who wanted no more of Ali Baba, left him, resolving to be beforehand with him and hoping to get all the treasure to himself. He rose the next morning long before the sun, and set out for the forest with 10 mules bearing great chests, which he designed to fill, and followed the road which Ali Baba had pointed out to him. He was not long before he reached the rock, and found out the place by the tree and other marks, which his brother had given him. When he reached the entrance of the cavern, he pronounced the words, "Open, Sesame!" and the door immediately opened, and when he was in, closed upon him. In examining the cave, he was in great admiration to find much more riches than he had apprehended from Ali Baba's account. He was so covetous and greedy of wealth that he could have spent the whole day in feasting his eyes with so much treasure, if the thought that he came to carry some away had not hindered him. He laid as many bags of gold as he could carry at the door of the cavern, but his thoughts were so full of the great riches he should possess, that he could not think of the necessary word to open it, but instead of sesame, said, "Open, barley," and was much amazed to find that the door remained fast shut. He named several sorts of grain, but still the door would not open. Cassim had never expected such an incident, and was so alarmed at the danger he was in, that the more he endeavored to remember the word sesame, the more his memory was confounded, and he had as much forgotten it as if he had never heard it mentioned. He threw down the bags he had loaded himself with, and walked distractedly up and down the cave, without having the least regard to the riches that were around him. About noon the robbers chanced to visit their cave, and at some distance from it saw Cassim's mules straggling about the rock, with great chests on their backs. Alarmed at this novelty, they galloped full speed to the cave. They drove away the mules, which Cassim had neglected to fasten, and they strayed through the forest so far that they were soon out of sight. The robbers never gave themselves the trouble to pursue them, being more concerned to know to whom they belonged, and while some of them searched about the rock, the captain and the rest went directly to the door, with their naked sabers in their hands, and pronouncing the proper words, it opened. Cassim, who heard the noise of the horses' feet from the middle of the cave, never doubted of the arrival of the robbers and his approaching death, but was resolved to make one effort to escape from them. To this end he rushed to the door, and no sooner heard the word sesame, which he had forgotten, and saw the door open, than he ran out and threw the leader down, but could not escape the other robbers, who with their sabers soon deprived him of life. The first care of the robbers after this was to examine the cave. They found all the bags which Cassim had brought to the door to be ready to load his mules, and carried them again to their places, without missing what Ali Baba had taken away before. Then, holding a council, and deliberating upon this occurrence, they guessed that Cassim, when he was in, could not get out again, but could not imagine how he had entered. It came into their heads that he might have got down by the top of the cave, but the aperture by which it received light was so high, and the rock so inaccessible without, that they gave up on this conjecture. That he came in at the door they could not believe, however, unless he had the secret of making it open. In short, none of them could imagine which way he had entered, for they were all persuaded nobody knew their secret, little imagining that Ali Baba had watched them. It was a matter of the greatest importance to them to secure their riches. They agreed therefore to cut Cassim's body into quarters, to hang 2 on one side and 2 on the other, within the door of the cave, to terrify any person who should attempt again to enter. They had no sooner taken this resolution than they put it into execution, and when they had nothing more to detain them, they left the place of their hoards well closed. They then mounted their horses, went to beat the roads again, and to attack the caravans they might meet. In the meantime, Cassim's wife was very uneasy when night came, and her husband was not returned. She ran to Ali Baba in alarm and said, "I believe, brother-in-law, that you know Cassim, your brother, is gone to the forest, and upon what account. It is now night, and he has not returned." I am afraid some misfortune has happened to him." Ali Baba, who had expected that his brother, after what he had said, would go to the forest, had declined going himself that day, for fear of giving him any umbrage, therefore told her, without any reflection upon her husband's unhandsome behaviour, that she need not frighten herself, for that certainly Cassim would not think it proper to come into town till the night should be pretty far advanced. Cassim's wife, considering how much it concerned her husband to keep the business secret, was the more easily persuaded to believe her brother-in-law. She went home again and waited patiently till midnight. She repented of her foolish curiosity and cursed her desire of penetrating into the affairs of her brother and sister-in-law. She spent all the night in weeping, and as soon as it was day, went to them, telling them by her tears the cause of her coming. Ali Baba did not wait for his sister-in-law to desire him to go and see what was become of Cassim, but departed immediately with his 3 asses, begging of her first to moderate her affliction. He went to the forest, and when he came near the rock, having seen neither his brother nor the mules in his way, was seriously alarmed at finding some blood spilt near the door, which he took for an ill omen. But when he had pronounced the word, and the door had opened, he was struck with horror at the dismal sight of his brother's body. Without adverting to the little fraternal affection his brother had shown for him, Ali Baba went into the cave to find something to enshroud his remains, and having loaded one of his asses with them, covered them over with wood. The other 2 asses he loaded with bags of gold, covering them with wood also as before, and then bidding the door shut, came away, but was so cautious as to stop some time at the end of the forest, that he might not go into the town before night. When he came home, he drove the 2 asses loaded with gold into his little yard, and left the care of unloading them to his wife, while he led the other to his sister-in-law's house. Ali Baba knocked at the door, which was opened by Morgiana, an intelligent slave, fruitful in inventions to ensure success in the most difficult undertakings, and Ali Baba knew her to be such. When he came into the court, he unloaded the ass, and taking Morgiana aside, said to her, "The first thing I ask of you is an inviolable secrecy, both for your mistress's sake and mine. Your master's body is contained in these 2 bundles, and our business is to bury him as if he had died a natural death. Go, tell your mistress I want to speak with her, and mind what I have said to you." Morgiana went to her mistress, and Ali Baba followed her. "Well, brother," said she with impatience, "what news do you bring me of my husband? I perceive no comfort in your countenance." "Sister," answered Ali Baba, "I cannot satisfy your inquiries unless you hear my story without speaking a word, for it is of as great importance to you as to me to keep what has happened secret." "Alas," said she, "this preamble lets me know that my husband is not to be found, but at the same time I know the necessity of secrecy, and I must constrain myself. Say on, I will hear you." Ali Baba then detailed the incidents of his journey, till he came to the finding of Cassim's body. "Now," said he, "sister, I have something to relate which will afflict you the more, because it is what you so little expect, but it cannot now be remedied. If my endeavours can comfort you, I offer to put that which God hath sent me to what you have, and marry you, assuring you that my wife will not be jealous, and that we shall live happily together. If this proposal is agreeable to you, we must think of acting so that my brother should appear to have died a natural death. I think you may leave the management of the business to Morgiana, and I will contribute all that lies in my power to your consolation." What could Cassim's widow do better than to accept of this proposal? For though her first husband had left behind him a plentiful substance, his brother was now much richer, and by the discovery of this treasure might be still more so. Instead, therefore, of rejecting the offer, she regarded it as the sure means of comfort, and drying up her tears, which had begun to flow abundantly, and suppressing the outcries usual with women who have lost their husbands, showed Ali Baba that she approved of his proposal. Ali Baba left the widow, recommended to Morgiana to act her part well, and then returned home with his ass. Morgiana went out at the same time to an apothecary, and asked for a sort of lozenges, which he prepared, and were very efficacious in the most dangerous disorders. The apothecary inquired who was ill at her master's. She replied with a sigh, her good master Cassim himself, that they knew not what his disorder was, but that he could neither eat nor speak. After these words, Morgiana carried the lozenges home with her, and the next morning went to the same apothecary's again, and with tears in her eyes, asked for an essence which they used to give to sick people only when at the last extremity. "Alas," said she, taking it from the apothecary, I am afraid that this remedy will have no better effect than the lozenges, and that I shall lose my good master." On the other hand, as Ali Baba and his wife were often seen to go between Kasim's and their own house all that day, and to seem melancholy, nobody was surprised in the evening to hear the lamentable shrieks and cries of Kasim's wife and Morgiana, who gave out everywhere that her master was dead. The next morning, soon after day appeared, Morgiana, who knew a certain old cobbler that opened his stall early before other people, went to him, and bidding him good morrow, put a piece of gold into his hand. "Well," said Baba Mustapha, which was his name, and who was a merry old fellow, looking at the gold, "this is a good hansel. What must I do for it? I am ready." "Baba Mustapha," said Morgiana, "you must take with you your sewing tackle, and go with me, but I must tell you, I shall blindfold you when you come to such a place." Baba Mustapha seemed to hesitate a little at these words. "Oh, oh," replied he, "you would have me do something against my conscience or against my honor?" "God forbid," said Morgiana, putting another piece of gold into his hand, "that I should ask anything that is contrary to your honor. Only come along with me and fear nothing." Baba Mustapha went with Morgiana, who, after she had bound his eyes with a handkerchief, conveyed him to our deceased master's house, and never unloosed his eyes till he had entered the room where she had put the corpse together. "Baba Mustapha," said she, "you must make haste and sew these quarters together, and when you have done, I will give you another piece of gold." After Baba Mustapha had finished his task, she blindfolded him again, gave him the third piece of gold as she had promised, and, recommending secrecy to him, carried him back to the place where she first bound his eyes, pulled off the bandage, and let him go home, but watched him that he returned toward his stall till he was quite out of sight, for fear he should have the curiosity to return and track her. By the time Morgiana had warmed some water to wash the body, Ali Baba came with incense to embalm it, after which it was sewn up in a winding sheet. Not long after, the joiner, according to Ali Baba's orders, brought the bier, which Morgiana received at the door, and helped Ali Baba to put the body into it. When she went to the mosque to inform the imam that they were ready, the people of the mosque, whose business it was to wash the dead, offered to perform their duty, but she told them that it was done already. Morgiana had scarcely got home before the imam and the other ministers of the mosque arrived. 4 neighbors carried the corpse on their shoulders to the burying ground, following the imam, who recited some prayers. Morgiana, as a slave to the deceased, followed the corpse, weeping, beating her breast, and tearing her hair. And Ali Baba came after with some neighbors, who often relieved the others in carrying the corpse to the burying ground. Kasim's wife stayed at home mourning, uttering lamentable cries with the women of the neighborhood, who came according to custom during the funeral, and joining their lamentations with hers, filled the quarter far and near with sorrow. In this manner, Kasim's melancholy death was concealed and hushed up between Ali Baba, his wife, Kasim's widow, and Morgiana, with so much contrivance that nobody in the city had the least knowledge or suspicion of the cause of it. 3 or 4 days after the funeral, Ali Baba removed his few goods openly to the widow's house, but the money he had taken from the robbers he conveyed thither by night. Soon after the marriage with his sister-in-law was published, and as these marriages are common with the Mussulman religion, nobody was surprised. As for Kasim's warehouse, Ali Baba gave it to his own eldest son, promising that if he managed it well, he would soon give him a fortune to marry very advantageously according to his situation. Let us now leave Ali Baba to enjoy the beginning of his good fortune, and return to the 40 robbers. They came again at the appointed time to visit their retreat in the forest, but great was their surprise to find Kasim's body taken away, with some of their bags of gold. "We are certainly discovered," said the captain, "and if we do not speedily apply some remedy, shall gradually lose all the riches which we have, with so much pains and danger, have been many years amassing together. All that we can think of the loss which we have sustained is, that the thief whom we surprised had the secret of opening the door, and we arrived luckily as he was coming out, but his body being removed, and with it some of our money, plainly shows that he had an accomplice. And as it is likely that they were but 2 who had discovered our secret, and one has been caught, we must look narrowly after the other. What say you, my lads?" All the robbers thought the captain's proposal so advisable that they unanimously approved of it, and agreed that they must lay all other enterprises aside to follow this closely and not give it up till they had succeeded. "I expected no less," said the captain, "from your fidelity, but first of all, one of you who is artful and enterprising must go into the town disguised as a traveler, to try if he can hear any talk of the strange death of the man whom we have killed, as he deserved, and endeavor to find out who he was and where he lived. This is a matter of the first importance for us to ascertain, that we may do nothing which we may have reason to repent of, by discovering ourselves in a country where we have lived so long unknown, but to warn him who shall take upon himself this commission, and to prevent our being deceived by his giving us a false report. I ask you all, if you do not think that in case of treachery, or even error of judgment, he should suffer death? Without waiting for the suffrages of his companions, one of the robbers started up and said, I submit to this condition, and think it an honor to expose my life by taking the commission upon me. But remember at least, if I do not succeed, that he neither wanted courage nor good will to serve the troop. After this robber had received great commendations from the captain, he disguised himself, and taking his leave of the troop that night, went into town just at daybreak, and walked up and down, till accidentally he came to Baba Mustafa's stall, which was always open before any of the shops. Baba Mustafa was seated with an awl in his hand, just going to work. The robber saluted him, bidding him good morrow, and perceiving that he was old, said, Honest man, you begin to work very early. Is it possible that one of your age can see so well? I question, even if it were somewhat lighter, whether you could see to stitch. Certainly, replied Baba Mustafa, you must be a stranger, and do not know me, for old as I am, I have extraordinarily good eyes, and you will not doubt it when I tell you that I sewed a body together in a place where I had not so much light as I have now. The robber was overjoyed to think that he had dressed himself, at his first coming into the town, to a man who in all probability could give him the intelligence he wanted. A dead body, replied he with affected amazement. What could you sew up a dead body for? You mean you sewed up his winding sheet? No, no, answered Baba Mustafa. I perceive your meaning. You want to have me speak out, but you shall know no more. The robber wanted no further assurance to be persuaded that he had discovered what he sought. He pulled out a piece of gold, and putting it into Baba Mustafa's hand, said to him, I do not want to learn your secret, though I can assure you I would not divulge it if you trusted me with it. The only thing which I desire of you is to do me the favor to show me the house where you stitched up the dead body. If I were disposed to do you that favor, replied Baba Mustafa, holding the money in his hand, ready to return it, I assure you I cannot. I was taken to a certain place where I was blinded. I was then led to the house, and afterwards brought back again in the same manner. You see, therefore, the impossibility of my doing what you desire. Well, replied the robber, you may, however, remember a little of the way that you were led blindfolded. Come, let me blind your eyes at the same place. We will walk together. Perhaps you may recognize some part. And as everybody ought to be paid for his trouble, there is another piece of gold for you. Gratify me in what I ask you. So saying, he put another piece of gold into his hand. The 2 pieces of gold were great temptations to Baba Mustafa. He looked at them a long time in his hand, without saying a word, thinking to himself what he should do, but at last he pulled out his purse and put them in. I cannot assure you, said he to the robber, that I can remember the way exactly, but since you desire, I will try what I can do. At these words Baba Mustafa rose up, to the great joy of the robber, and without shutting his shop, where he had nothing valuable to lose, he led the robber to the place where Morgiana had bound his eyes. It was here, said Baba Mustafa. I was blindfolded, and I turned as you see me. The robber, who had his handkerchief ready, tied it over his eyes, walked by him till he stopped, partly leading and partly guided by him. I think, said Baba Mustafa, I went no farther. And he had now stopped directly at Kasim's house, where Ali Baba then lived. End of part 1.